Okay, great. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks, Lucas, for accepting our invitation for this for your recent preprint that we're excited to hear about. So Lucas is currently a postdoc at Laboratory of Neural Systems with Dr. Freywald at Rockefeller University, and he's co-supervised by Josh Tenenbaum and Zhao Jinghuang, and is working on neural substraces of compositional generalization. He completed his PhD with Michael Brainard at UCSF with a thesis on neural mechanisms of motor skill flexibility in songbirds. He actually presented this work last year, I know at least in both COSIGN and NCM conferences. And since then, we were excited to hear about this project. And now the preprint is out. And that's why we asked him to present here. And without further ado, here's Lucas.
Thanks a lot, Amin, and thanks everyone for for coming, for inviting me. Also to my dad, who I met at COSIGN, and who I think has a lot of related interests on compositionality, motor behavior, and so on, motor sequences, and so on. Yeah, so I'll talk about. I keep flipping around titles, but I'll call it the neural basis of symbol compositionality, and I'll talk about two things. I'll mainly talk about the preprint, which is about what action symbols, what I call action symbols, and the second part I'll briefly talk about grammatical rules for recombining these action symbols and neural substrates of that. So that'll be very brief, but that's a paper we're hoping to submit in a month or two. So I'll start with maybe just a thought experiment. Imagine how you'd respond if I asked you to draw an animal that doesn't exist. So children around the age of 9 are quite good at this task, and interestingly, they tend to use the strategy of recombining learned parts in novel ways. And also, please stop me if you have questions or comments. So this includes like mixing parts from different animals, such as pigtails and camel humps, or repeating a part such as a head a variable number of times. And these drawings reflect an ability to internally recombine simple discrete units into complex composite representations, an ability called compositional generalization. And a lot of research suggests that this ability, compositional generalization, reflects the fundamental capacity of neural circuits supporting intelligent behavior. It allows the brain to access a large combinatorial space of possible solutions or representations, allowing humans and other animals to intelligently deal with new situations and solve new problems. And further, it is thought to be potentially the biological basis or a biological basis of symbolic abstraction in humans, including in cognitive faculties like language, reasoning, and imagination. So despite its seemingly critical role in intelligence, the neural basis of compositionality is poorly understood. And so partly inspired by cognitive science literature, we hypothesize that compositional generalization depends on internal mechanisms reflecting a symbolic grammar. And so by grammar, we mean a generative process implemented in neural circuits in the brain, involving a set of discrete elements we'll call symbols, and grammatical rules for how to combine symbols into composites. So grammars are a useful intermediate level of extraction between behavior on the one hand and neurons on the other. So this is a hypothesis.
Sorry to interrupt, Lucas. I think the slides are not, the pages are not turning for me. Is it the same for you guys there? Or is it just me?
Yeah, we are not seeing that.
Okay, now it's going.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe that's because I have different sort of desktops on my. So, sorry. Yeah, sorry about that.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so if I'm switching now back and forth, do you see it?
It's working perfect.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No. Sorry, actually I have to reorganize my screen. It's a bit weird right now. Yeah.
It's very small now. I think I think you're not on fully, so that's it. Yeah.
Much better now. Yeah, perfect.
It's good. Jeez. Let's see. So you see that, but you see the entire, you see like the browser, not the
I see the browser.
you see the browser. Okay. So let me try and put in slideshow. Okay. Good. It should be switching now.
Yeah, it's switching. I see the tabs on top though.
Well, that's okay.
But that's okay.
That's okay. Yeah. So I apologize. I can. Yep. Okay.
No problem. Go ahead.
So I'll briefly just skim through the slides I missed. So I talked about two stories, and Hasty drawing animal doesn't exist. And kids exhibit interesting behaviors like these. They'll recombine different parts from different animals, such as the head of variable number of times. And this reflects the ability to internally combine discrete units, which ability we call compositional generalization. And this is critical for solving novel problems, as well as potentially the biological basis of symbolic abstraction in humans. And so the idea of a grammar, this is kind of the hypothesis, is that basically a mechanism implemented in neural circuits that has discrete elements or units called symbols and rules for combining those elements, which we'll call grammatical rules. Okay, and then I got to here. So to illustrate the idea of the hypothesis of a grammar, consider again the drawing task. An appropriate grammar may consist of symbols representing categories of body parts. So just move this thing over. Zoom is just kind of weird. Consists of symbols representing categories of body parts and rules to combine those parts, such as repeating a part n times. And critically, there exists empirical evidence in behavioral patterns how people and animals generalize to solve problems. There remains a major gap in knowledge because whether and how neural processes implement symbolic grammars is unclear. So what I've done is taken a multi-level approach in my postdoc towards understanding the neural basis of compositional generalization. So consider first an approach that tries to explain compositional behavior like this drawing ability directly in terms of neural activity. And I think directly mapping between these two things, these two levels is quite difficult. And the idea is that this problem may become tractable if we build an explanation across multiple levels, spanning neural activity, neural computation, cognitive symbolic programs, and behavior. And the middle levels of neural computation symbolic program will be inferred, not directly observed. But they be verified or evaluated in terms of the ability to explain each other and also explain neural and behavioral data. So that's kind of the philosophical framework, I guess. It's also possible that symbolic programs are not the right way to understand the mechanism, in which case our goal is still to explain how neural computation can support highly structured compositional generalization. So I'm working, in order to implement this multiple approach, I work with a few different scientists. I'm mainly advised by Vinrik, also co-advised by Josh and Xiaojing, who have different expertises in neurophysiology, cognitive science, and neural theory. And I also want to give a shout out to two research assistants that I work closely with, Dan and Kadar, as well as Yue, who I collaborate with on neural modeling. Okay, so a major impediment to progress has been the fact that compositional generalization has largely been studied in complex tasks in humans, whereas we need experimental access to neural circuits rather than animal models. So the first thing I want to do is establish a neurally tractable animal model of grammar-based generalization. So I think we succeeded in doing something like that in the form of a macaque drawing task. So this task builds on two lines of foundational work, especially compositional structure and drawing humans, including our 2020 study that I reference here, and studies of neurophysiology of motor behavior, especially in monkeys. So the drawing task is inspired by a study I performed with Josh in humans, This is a drawing task to study symbolic grammars, which we then plan to translate to monkeys. And the idea is very straightforward. You basically show people images of geometric figures like this, composed of lines and circles of different orientations and transformations, and basically ask them to draw this, right? So you could consider how you would draw this. Probably there's some sort of structure underlying how you draw it. A common kind of structure is something like this, where people will draw the background gradings, and then put on top like two lollipops, right? But alternative strategy could be, to draw vertical skewers, like line and then another line with circles on top and so on from left to right. So basically, by analyzing behavior and various computational models of drawing, we found that people's behavior was consistent with some sort of symbolic grammar like this. So, so the next thing, so this seemed like an ideal task, didn't require language or really sort of complex reasoning that we could potentially implement in monkeys. So this is a schematic of the task that we implement in monkeys. Monkeys are shown images of, again, composite geometric figures and have to draw by tracing. And the critical aspect is that they're challenged with novel images and have to figure out on their own how to draw each one. So I think it's useful just to list kind of what I think are maybe defining criteria or essential criteria of this task. Images were static with no cues telling the monkey what movements to make. Images vary substantially across trials, including novel images. Images had ambiguity, meaning that each image could be parsed in multiple possible ways. And assessing how subjects resolve this ambiguity reveals properties of prior knowledge. And finally, images could be continuously parameterized, so, such as changing the orientation lines in a continuous manner. But if given this continuous parameterization, subjects still exhibit discrete structure and behavior and neural activity. This is evidence that the discrete structure is generated internally as opposed to trivially inherited from the stimulus. And the last critical ingredient is the subjects are trained to have prior knowledge of an action grammar. And there are two key components. So stroke symbols, which are these action categories corresponding to single strokes, resemble shapes like lines and circles. And grammatical rules, something like a syntax, which defines the ways, the orderings that you're allowed to combine strokes. And they can be rules such as repeat a circle n times. So we found that they can generalize these grammars to draw new images. So I think it's worth maybe briefly alluding to prior drawing-like studies and that our study built on to clarify differences. So this is a study by Bruno Averbeck and others where monkeys use a joystick to copy images, but a major limitation was they're on order of like 4 images that were learned over many months, and so each shape was memorized. And a study by Andy Schwartz, where monkeys had to trace on touchscreen to track a cursor. In this case, the monkeys didn't self-generate decide their own movements. The movements were cued by visual cues. Okay, so with that sort of lengthy background, I now present two main stories. First part on action symbols. So yeah, this part. So subjects first learn a set of primitives defined as specific stereotype spatial temporal stroke trajectories that they've learned in response to specific shapes. So these primitives were idiosyncratic to each subject and shape. For example, here you see individual trials in the bottom in purple and yellow that of the circle primitive, which was drawn differently by the 2 different subjects. So similar within subject across trials, the 4 different trials, but different across the 2 subjects. And quantification that we performed, not shown here, we found for each subject, all the primitives were substantially different. And for each shape, the primitives were different across subjects. Okay, so then once they've learned this grammar, we can test them on complex images, which we call characters. So here's some example drawings by one monkey for 14 different characters. And so the monkey's drawings resemble each target image and do so in a way that's not directly tracing, but instead reflects the monkey's constructed version of that image. So I'll go into much more detail, but to elaborate on this talk. But basically, what's going on here is that the drawings are composed of a small set of learned stroke primitives, each of which is represented here with a different color. And so we'll come back to this in a bit. I'll just show you, I think, the videos that you've already seen in the title slide, but I'll walk you through it. So in this video, the subject initiates the trial by holding the blue button and has a couple seconds to observe the image and plan. Then after a go cue, he can draw using any number of strokes of any type, and then he decides on his own to end by pressing the done button, at which point he gets a juice reward proportional to the visual similarity of the final drawing to the image. Here's an example for a second monkey, Diego. Okay. And then, we, to perform recordings, we implanted 16 32-channel arrays. These are microprobes, floating microelectrode arrays, targeting many areas of frontal cortex. So including, those associated with motor control, like M1, with more action planning, like premotor cortex, and other cognitive or executive functions, including lateral prefrontal cortex, the frontal polar cortex, pre-supplementary motor area. And PMV here, or ventral premotor cortex, or F5, is highlighted because in our analysis of all the areas, it turned out to be the one where we identify a strong representation of action symbol. So to get there, we focus on three essential properties with putative symbolic representation: invariance, categorical structure, and recombination. And we ask whether we can identify these properties in both behavior and neural activity. So we'll start with invariance. So invariance means activity reflects or exhibits a form of abstraction in which it's largely independent of variables relevant to the goal of the task. And a well-known form of invariance in handwriting is the phenomenon of motor equivalence, in which writing exhibits trajectories that generalize across the specific muscle patterns that use, like different effectors or different sizes. And so inspired by this, we did kind of a simple variant of this. We tested generalization of stroke trajectories across motor variation due to size and location. And so the left, this schematic depicts images from three trials, and one is a well-practiced circle, location and size, and the other two are novel combinations of size and location. They've drawn these locations, but these are new sizes. And the right depicts possible drawing outcomes. So that first, the monkey may just fail to generalize, kind of extreme outcome, but second, he may optimize movement efficiency by taking the shortest path from the finger starting location, even if that means trajectories vary across trials, such as starting locations or their directions. So sort of like a tracing strategy. And third, he may exhibit motor invariance by reusing the same stroke trajectory, just rescaled, even if that means less efficient paths. And so we found that drawings exhibit motor invariance. And so this is clear in the 9 example trials for the circle across 3 sizes and locations. And in all cases, the circle will start from the top and go counterclockwise. And similarly, this is showing similarly for other shapes. On that day, we see stroke trajectories invariant to size and location. And so in the neural data, we ask whether neural activity also exhibits invariance. And we focus on time window between image onset and the go cue, which we call the planning window. And so this is just an example of the kind of data we have. So within a single session, each inner row here is a unit. This combines single and multi-units. And each panel is a different brain area. The order of, I think, around 300 to 400 units here. And essentially, you see a large variety of different kinds of activity patterns aligned to the trial. But basically, every area except the frontal pole shows some systematic relationship to different events in the trial. So stuff is happening. So we can actually ask, now we can ask what's happening. So here's an example unit in PMV. Showing a raster plot at the top and trial average fire rates on the bottom. And soon after image onset, the unit's activity strongly differs by the primitive he's planning to draw. And then we can further group trials into 4 columns for the 4 different drawing locations. And you see this unit has encodes the primitives in a similar manner across locations. And so this invariance is also clear when we extend this analysis to look at single trials at the population level. So here I'm plotting 2D embeddings of population activity using UMAP. And each dot here represents a single trial colored by the primitive subject plan to draw in that trial. You can see the activity is separated and clustered based on the primitive. And here I'm zooming out to show all the brain areas recorded in the same trials. And you can see that might be hard to see, but the point here is that PMV is quite unique in terms of its clear distinction between activity patterns for each primitive. So the colors are separated within each panel, but this consistency of, and also the consistency of that separation of that pattern across the panels, the different locations. And so no other area shows this. And so to quantify this more carefully, quantify location of variance, we use a simple approach, just basically based on Euclidean distance between population activity patterns, normalizing between 0 and 1, where 1 is an upper bound defined as the maximum pairwise distance across all pairs of trials. And here I'm plotting the pairwise distance between each unique condition defined by location primitive. And you can see these sort of off-diagonal streaks indicating that a given primitive has similar activity across locations. And so to then quantify this, summarize the quantification across units and sessions, we computed two metrics, one on the y-axis primitive encoding, which is basically the average Euclidean distance that varies with across variations in primitive, controlling for location. And the x-axis location encoding is how strong the activity differs by location, controlling for primitive. So consistent with the example unit, PMV activity is in the top left. It strongly encodes primitives and weakly encodes location. So how sort of special is this? So we can compare this to other areas reported simultaneously. And for example, in DLPFC, in area 46, we don't see this off-diagonal structure. Instead, we see this block structure consistent with activity varying more by location. And we can plot all the areas in the same axes. And PMV is the only one that exhibits the strong primitive encoding invariant to location. And in separate analogous experiments, we found that PMV also encodes primitives invariant to size. And you'll see this kind of plot a couple of times. The color indicates the statistical significance. The more blue you are, the more, based on how many pairwise comparisons across Bayesian areas you sort of win. So the more blue you are, the more this area beats all the other areas in primitive encoding. The more red you are, the more you beat other areas in location encoding. Okay, so next we look at categorical structure. And this refers to the existence of discrete classes or types of motor acts. And examples include like stroke types in Chinese characters, explicitly named types, or stroke types that children develop in drawing. And a standard way to study categorical structure involves testing responses to ambiguous stimuli. For instance, consider how you might write this letter. What about now? Or now? And this example illustrates that because we understand letters as categories, the same image is generally interpreted as either an H or an A and not something in between. And so similar to the example, we presented images that across trials varied randomly and parametrically between two well-practiced shapes. In this case, images 1 and 7. And the monkey really learned two primitives in response to these two endpoint images, kind of like a U-like thing and a circle thing. So then for each trial's drawing, we can quantify its relative kinematic similarity to primitives 1 and 2 using a primitive alignment index that varies between 0 and 1. And we found the subjects drew the intermediate morph shapes using strokes that resembled either primitives 1 or 2. And these results reveal two behavioral findings indicating categorical structure. First, there was trial variation between primitives 1 and 2, given the same image, in this case, image number 5. And second, there was a steep sigmoidal nonlinearity in the primitive alignment scores, even though the images are morphed in a linear manner. And so here are a few other example images showing the variety of kinds of image manipulations we used. In each case, you can see behavior exhibits this discrete categorical structure. There is also some continuous variation on top of that, but there's this clear discrete structure too. And so we asked whether neural activity in PMV also exhibits this categorical structure. So here, I'm going to plot PMV population activity projected to its first two dimensions using DCA. So each little curve here represents the temporal progression of activity or neural trajectory for one of the shapes indexed by the Roman numeral here. And after image onset marked with the X's in the middle of the plot, the trajectory diverges to two states, consistent with categorical encoding of primitives 1 and 2. And this was also true for the ambiguous image number 5. And so here we see that activity reflects what primitive, the category the subject is planning to draw, even when the image is identical. And we can quantify this neural effect using the primitive alignment index that we previously used for behavior, but now applied to neural data. And just as in behavior, we see that two hallmarks of categorical structure: this trial-by-trial variation for image 5 and sigmoidal nonlinearity. And this effect was strongest in PMV, which I'm quantifying here. So this is just summarizing the effect across brain regions and sessions. And an interesting, or to us, I guess, surprising point was that we didn't observe this effect in prefrontal cortex, which is previous studies have found activity that encodes categorical differences in like perceptual decision-making tasks and so on. So that's, if we have some thoughts on what this implies, that maybe we can discuss then. Finally, we looked at finally, we looked at recombination, and we tested whether subjects spontaneously recombine primitives to draw novel characters, which we designed to be ambiguous. We reasoned that subjects would respond with a few kinds of drawings. So first, they may fail to produce accurate drawings. Second, they may succeed, but do so by tracing a single best-fitting trajectory. Third, they may use multiple strokes, but strokes that don't resemble the subject's primitives. And finally, they may recombine their learned primitives. So here's an example image on top. In the bottom, the learned primitives for subjects 1 and 2. And you can see that subjects 1 and 2 both successfully drew their interpretation of this image, but they did so using different strokes. And subjects 1 strokes matched his own primitives, and subjects 2 strokes matched his own primitives. And across hundreds of unique images, above 80% of strokes match each subject's own primitives, while only around 10% match other subject primitives. And that's just schematized here. Subject 1, subject 2. And so this indicates subjects recombine primitives to draw the characters. Does PMV activity also reflect this combination? And so for each primitive, we compared when it was drawn as part of stroke sequences and character tasks versus when it was drawn in isolation in single shape tasks. So in character tasks, the monkey decides on its own to use it. In single shape tasks, it's sort of ground truth. The monkey is instructed to use it. And so each trajectory here is average population activity for stroke primitive in different colors aligned to stroke onset. And we see the activity for each primitive was similar between character and single shape tasks. And summarizing, using the same kind of approach as before, we see that on the y-axis, PMV population activity scored highly the primitive encoding score, and low in a task encoding score on the x-axis that measures the difference between character and single shape tasks, controlling for the primitive. And so comparing across areas, we found this was strongest in PMV. And for instance, pre-SMA has strong sort of sequence or context dependence. And this indicates that PMV activity for primitive is reused in character drawings. Okay, so taking together these results reveal invariance, categorical structure, and combination in both behavior and neural activity in PMV. So from this, we conclude that we have identified what seems like a localized representation of action symbols in PMV. So we wanted to further characterize PMV activity in this task, and in particular, to what extent does PMV reflect visual and motor aspects of the task. And it's partly motivated by prior findings in PMV recordings. It's known to be PMV neurons are known to be visually responsive, especially to visual presentation of manipulative objects, such as the ring in the plot on the left. So for instance, the PMV neuron on the left fires for the ring, both when the monkey just sees it and as well as the monkey is grasping it. PMV is also known to encode kinematic parameters of movement. The neuron on the right encodes the direction of the hand movement, firing most strongly for movements towards the down right direction. So we tested whether PMV in our drawing task is driven by visual properties of the image or by finger motor kinematics. So to test, so we designed a task variant to associate what shape the subject was looking at from the first primitive he's planning to draw. So in this multi-shape task, each image consists of multiple shape components, and the subject could freely choose which to draw first. The subject was free to look at different shapes during the planning period. And by analyzing neural activity aligned to gaze fixations, we could ask whether activity encodes what shape the monkey's looking at versus what primitive the monkey's planning to draw first. So here's a plot of fixations in small circles overlaid on the image during the planning period of a couple seconds. And on this trial, you can see that the monkey planned to draw the horizontal line, but looked variably at each of the images, shapes in the image. So here I'm plotting mean fixation line decoding probability for each of the 4 shapes that were encountered on that day. And this includes only fixation events where the planned primitive was a squiggle, this sort of maroon squiggle, and the visually fixated shape was upside down V. And so it's clear from here that activity strongly reflects the squiggle or the planned primitive. And here I'm just including more data. And so these plots show that more data now showing still when the monkey is planning to draw draw the squiggle, but now looking at all the other different kinds of shapes. And regardless of what shape the monkey is looking at, PMV encoded the planned primitive. And here I'm just showing all 16 conditions. In all cases, PMV encoded the planned primitive and the shape in the columns, and not what he's looking at, which would be the shape in the rows. So summary PMV activity strongly encodes a planned primitive, not the shape in view. And so what about finger velocity? So we asked whether PMV activity encodes the finger velocity during drawing, using a linear regression model mapping from the X and Y velocity to ongoing neural activity. And so importantly, in order to test for encoding of velocity that was generic, and we tested how models trained on one subset of primitives generalized to predict activity for another subset of primitives. And so here I'm showing summarizing the findings. Here you see primary motor cortex was the only reason with significant fractional neural variance explained by velocity in this approach. And just note that it was fractional explained variance is often negative from PMV and for many other areas, indicating that kinematic models performed worse in generalization than simply guessing the neural activity using the mean activity across trials. So overall, these findings show the compositional generalization is supported by a localized representation of action symbols in PMV, representation that is abstracted away from visual and motor parameters. So this concludes the first part, action symbols, and I'll very briefly discuss grammatical rules, which govern how to recombine action symbols into sequences. So past studies of action sequencing, I don't know, maybe I'll stop here and see if there are any sort of questions or comments first, or yeah, I can just keep going to the end.
I have a question, Lucas. Andrew Brashinsky here. This is super fascinating. I'll keep the other conversation to later. But have you looked, if I understood correctly, the monkey always sees the stimulus on the screen. Yeah.
Yes.
Have you looked at situations, they're probably simpler things, obviously, where it's memory driven, and does this PMV effect hold up then?
Yeah, so that I would love to be able to set up a paradigm a task that incorporates that. So I attempted to get monkeys to be able to do this task. Either, let's say, you can show the image and then make the image disappear, and it's a working memory kind of task, or you can have the image be in a different screen, so it's sort of a copy situation where the monkey presumably would have to sort of encode it somehow and work in memory. But I kind of stopped doing that early on because I found that the monkeys really struggled with anything beyond quite simple images of just like 1 or 2 lines. Mm-hmm. So that's something I'd like to try in the future, but yeah, not sure. Yeah.
No, it sounds difficult for sure.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I have also a quick question. Thanks for the talk. But my question is that you showed this nice location invariance in PMV, but I was wondering if you had the chance to look whether you see size invariance or also orientation invariance in PMV also, or any other.
Yeah, so I didn't show the data for it, but I did say it. So, but I said it very quickly. So with size variance, we do see that as well in PMV, using the same analysis and same methodology as in the location variance stuff. But not so rotation invariance. No, partly because by design we consider each each rotated shape as being a different primitive, and so yeah, it's we don't really see rotation invariance but I don't think it's really the right task to test that.
Thanks. We can discuss that later at the end of the talk. Thank you.
Yep.
So I'm just curious about that, right? Because I would assume that humans would show incredible amount of rotation invariance to
yeah.
that.
Yeah. So humans do. Yeah, it's actually very interesting. The NeurIPS paper, the paper that I wrote with Josh, we actually did explicitly test that, and so humans were rotation invariant. In for instance, a human that will use certain strategy for doing the vertically structured images would generalize to the horizontal if it were rotated using the same strategy. So I think it's a very interesting question. I don't know. I don't have a good sense of whether the monkeys would do the same thing. I haven't really tested that.
Yeah, and then just one
Yeah.
more on this topic is, the classical way of checking these kind of things, as you showed nicely, would be effector invariance. And of course, again, I'm sure it's difficult to train the monkey to do potentially, but I'm just curious whether you investigated that all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's also something I love to do. But there was a lot of kind of just sort of basic training involved in getting the monkeys to just do skilled, tracing with one arm or one hand or the other. So it's not right now. It's not really possible to just ask them to generalize to the other arm. So I think there are ways to maybe do this in a more careful manner, but I haven't really asked about that.
Oh, it wasn't, just so it's clear, it wasn't a criticism. I was just, given the effort that already went into
Yeah.
it, so I was just curious if you at least
Yeah.
tried it out.
I think no, I think it's a good question. I think one way to do this would be, let's say, somehow train a monkey to use either hand, let's say in different cues or different blocks or whatever, but then train certain primitives with one hand and then see if it'll generalize to the other hand. But no, we haven't really done that. My guess is that there might be some differences in the ability to transfer grammatical rules across hands versus more low level primitives. But yeah, have not really done it.
Great, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe I'll keep going then. Okay, and so this will be relatively quick. Let's see. So okay, what do we mean by grammatical ability? So I'd say that past studies. Let me just. So by grammatical ability, I mean the ability to generate self-generate, create sequences or behavior that's self-generated, problem-specific, rule-based, and also incorporates novel combinations of discrete actions. So by this I mean self-generated, I mean there are no external cues. Problem-specific means that there's a particular, let's say, target image you have to draw, or the particular goal in a given situation that you're trying to accomplish, as opposed to randomly generating movements. Rule-based, which means that across different trials, you find evidence of some consistent rule. There's some sort of underlying grammatical structure. Novel combinations means the capacity to, generalize to new images and new problems. And I would say that, there's many people have studied action sequencing, including a lot of you guys. And I would say that at least in neural studies, in animal models, prior studies have not really gotten that grammatical ability, but I've really focused more on things like external cues, memorized sequences, or let's say working memory based sequences. So we can discuss that, if you like or after. But the point was that I basically try to set out to design a task where get at what I'm defining as grammatical ability. So concretely, these rules define the correct order to draw individual shapes. So for instance, a shape order rule is quite simple. It says instructs what order to draw the shapes in growing location. So a correct behavior here is indicated by the color from blue to green. Direction rule indicates what order to draw based on direction, ignoring shapes. A repeat shape rule is a bit more abstract, tells you where to repeat a given shape, like the circle, some variable number of times, and then repeat a line a variable number of times. Or something like creating compound shapes is, so let's say, group shapes like lines and circles into lollipops, and then structure your overall sequence using lollipops. So we found behaviorally that our monkeys can learn and generalize all these rules. And I'll focus on the repeat shape and compound shapes rules because I think they're most interesting. And importantly, generalization was images were harder than training images because they included more items. So there's evidence of extrapolating the rule. So here's an example of Diego generalizing the rule to this image to repeat circles and repeat lines. And note that during training, he saw maximum 2 circles and 2 lines. And Diego generalizing the rule to place lollipops. This might also be consistent with alternation. I haven't really teased those apart carefully, but like alternating line, circle, line, circle, line, circle. So here are example solutions after learning each of these rules for the same image. So this is repeating lines, then repeating circles. He produces strokes in the order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Here, repeating circles, repeating lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, consistent with the rule. And here's repeating lollipops. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And as I already mentioned, but generalization was immediate. So the first trial, they could do this when they see this image, and extrapolated. So training was maximum 2 circles, 2 lines in an image. So maximum 4 objects. To quantify this, it's simple. I can quantify this in a simple way. For the repeat.
Hi, Lucas, Paul Gribble. Just a quick question about the lolly versus circle versus line. What's the evidence that the monkey represents a lolly as something different than just some circles and some lines? Because if they always get a circle and a line together, you might think, well, that's a lolly, but they might think, well, it's just a circle and a line.
Yeah, so I can't say that the monkeys really have like a unitary kind of representation of like a lollipop as opposed to circle plus line. All I can say here is that behavior is consistent with them sort of chunking lines and circles into units. I would say, sorry. So for all of the studies, for all the results I'm showing behavior, I think we can only say so much in terms of what the monkey understands. I would say that, so the repeat.
I keep talking over you. You said that there's behavioral evidence that they're, I don't remember your words, chunking a circle together. Is the evidence that they always do one after the other? Is that the evidence?
Yeah, so for the lollipop rule, that is the evidence, is that they do lines and circles, and those lines and circles are adjacent to each other. So
you're giving them adjacent to each other, aren't you? I don't understand.
Right. So the idea is that given an image is ambiguity. So under a different rule, the same monkey will not do that. But will instead, let's say, first draw the circles, then draw the lines. When the monkey has learned this rule that I'm calling the lollipop rule, what I mean very explicitly is that the monkey will take a new image and find lines and circles that are next to each other and draw them consecutively. Yeah. So no worries.
I just missed one point. What instructs them? I couldn't get it out of the video either. What instructs the monkey what the rule is?
There's no instruction apart from it's within a session they've learned that rule.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I've also developed methods to use visual cues to have them switch trial by trial to different rules. The trade-off is that the rules have to be simpler for them to be able to do that. Yeah.
So the rules, I still don't understand something from the video. Maybe on each trial they see a grayed out version of what they have to trace, and then they have to trace it. So how do you know that there's any rule-based anything? I mean, how do you know that they're not just simply stimulus response mapping? I see something, I need to trace it.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to be clear about defining alternatives to what do we mean to not be rule-based. So I don't think they're, for instance, memorizing. I don't think they're memorizing specific sequences because they're generalizing to new sequences. And I don't think it's a low-level stimulus motor response because they are producing actions that are outside of the actions they produce during training. I think you could frame it as a stimulus or response guided by some sort of contextual knowledge. Like right now, my stimulus or response is look for circles and then draw them, right? And that is consistent
For anything.
with what I'm arguing for, right?
Whatever I see on the screen, even if it's a triangle, I just trace what's on the screen.
Yeah, but that's not what's going on. I mean, it depends what you mean by trace, right? Because if by trace you mean just start in the top left and the way like an ant would trace the image, put your finger down and then make efficient movements to try and capture all the image. So like put ink down all the image. Then that would not explain how they can generalize those rules to new images. Their behavior is not explained by simple, efficient tracing, if that's what you mean by trace.
If I understand correctly, Lucas, they could see the same image, and given the context of the day, in this session, they would take different sets of actions. They would draw all circles first and then lines, or all lines first and then circles.
Exactly.
For the same
That's
image.
right. The exact same image, different sessions. The very first trial they see it.
Stimulus.
Yeah, sometimes.
Sorry?
Why don't you go on? Okay.
Yeah, so I would say that, the difficulty seems to be the fact that the stimulus is present, right? And that implies maybe a more trivial strategy could be used of just tracing the stimulus. And I think, yeah, that's obviously a concern, I think, if you're going into this paradigm, right? But I think their behavior is better explained by them having some more higher order understanding of how the objects are grouped together into sequences. As in, first do all the circles, then do all the lines. And it's possible that I think it's right that there's a component of tracing because they also know they have to make an accurate image. Sometimes if they make a mistake, they'll go back and clean it up, right? But basically what I'm trying to say is the explicit notion of efficient tracing, if you say it's about starting at some location and having some directional bias and low-level decisions of I've hit an intersection where there are a few choices to make, I could start tracing up or down, right? I think that does not explain their behavior as well as them having this higher order rule.
Quick question. So how much of that do you think is also the position and posture? Because from the video that you showed, it also looked like they were almost leaning against the cage on one arm and then using the other arm to do the tracing. So how much of the order is just ease of access? Because when you mentioned motor invariance, you mentioned within that day that they were invariant. So I assume they have different ways of doing things between days of sessions.
No, so maybe if I did, I missed out the mistake. They're invariant throughout their life, basically once they've learned this. So I think that things like posture and other constraints based on the location of the screen and so on had an influence on how they learned it, right? So each monkey, I placed no constraints on what a monkey could learn in terms of how to draw the circle. And one monkey, let's say, learned to draw it this way, another monkey learned to draw it this way. And I think that partly reflects whatever posture they took, where the reward spot was, and so on. But the key idea is that once they've learned that, then then they have this primitive action that they will use, even if in any given trial, it's not the most efficient thing for them to do.
Great. Thank you.
How that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to clarify more about the claim I'm making here that this is a higher rule. I would also say that a part of the support for this is that is also the neural data also suggests they have an understanding of the structure of this rule. So this is the quantification of behavior in that experiment. So this is basically I'm plotting an x-axis in an image, how many circles exist, and on the y-axis, how many circles the monkey repeated at the start of the trial. So each x years an image averaged over its first few trials, and so this is showing that the monkey generalizes to images larger than the images that the monkey saw during training. Yeah. And this is the same data, just taking the mean. And compare this case. This is kind of a straw man random. It's just it's not the strongest alternative, but this is simply just randomly choosing. But you can also have a different alternative, which is, let's say the monkey has learned different sets of sequences. So in this case, explicitly, those sets are circle, circle, line, line, circle, line, circle, 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 line, line, circle, circle, line, circle, line, line, circle, line, right? Because those are all the monkey saw during training. Given those sets, the monkey would still not be expected to, if the monkey just learned these concrete sequences, the monkey would not be expected to generalize this way either. And let's see. So I don't want to, I know that I was supposed to end. So how about this? I will, let me just go straight to the, let me talk, and let me present this slide, and then I'll go straight to the conclusion, just to summarize and end. So what I'm trying to argue is that there are certain properties of this sequencing task that are interesting. So they're self-generated in that there are no sequencing cues. There are no external cues for order to do things. Problem specific, each image gives a monkey a new problem the monkey has to solve. And there's correct and incorrect things, solutions. Rule-based, that's self-evident, and novel in that the monkey generalizes on the first trial. Okay. And I'll skip the stuff on neural substrates, and I'll go right to the summary. So just to summarize the overall talk, the first part, we talked about action symbols, and we tested for 3 properties of the symbolic representations: invariance, categorical structure, and combination. We found these properties in both behavior and neural activity. In neural activity, these properties were each strongest in PMV, implying a localized representation of action symbols in PMV. In the second part, we focused on grammatical rules, but very briefly. Found that macaques can learn and generalize a variety of rules, and it resulted in discuss on gap timing and gaze patterns. We also find evidence that monkeys understand this hardware structure of the repeat grammar. And in neural activity, we see some sort of encoding grammatical variables in pre-SMA. And there's a geometry to the structure that suggests simple explanations for the capacity to generalize. And sorry, I didn't have time to go over that. And I'd like to maybe just point out a few implications, maybe like food for thought for discussion. But first is the findings reveal a neural basis of a symbol compositional or symbol generalization, some sort of symbolic grammar. And the neural basis of this is a form of explicit neural implementation of some sort of symbolic grammar involving specific frontocortical areas. Second, these findings provide evidence for symbolic representation in neural activity, even though it's a simple kind in motor behavior. But this is interesting probably because prior evidence for something like discrete symbols has been from behavioral and computational studies. So we're suggesting that there's sort of like a proto-symbol kind of property in this sort of motor concept that the monkeys have. And third, finding action symbols in PMV contrasts with a lot of evidence for abstraction in other brain areas and other kinds of cognitive tasks. There's a lot of prior work in PMV of interesting kinds of invariants and abstract properties, and also in other premotor areas as well. But this is all just to say that this is consistent with the idea that mode abstraction is an important kind of abstraction the brain does. That's a distinct kind of abstraction from let's say other kinds of more abstract rules that seem to be implemented in prefrontal cortex. And it's been relatively understudied in systems neuroscience, and at least in my case, depends critically on PMV and pre-SMA. And finally, PMV, pre-SMA, and other areas of the brain, including, let's say, parietal, temporal, prefrontal, and subcortical areas, as a potential foundation for understanding how neural circuits recombine symbols in a grammar, in this case, in a motor behavior. And maybe even a little more philosophical, I just end in a very brief note, which is start to talk with this bigger picture goal, understand whether and how grammatically structured operations implemented in neural substrates. And so the findings are presented kind of starting to fill the gaps. They suggest PMV and pre-SMA are core contributors, at least in the context of motor behavior. There's reason to believe that, so PMV and pre-SMA interact. One is that they're anatomically connected. Also, compared to other premotor areas, PMV is relatively strongly connected with prefrontal cortex, especially VLPFC. And VLPFC is also connected with pre-SMA. So this suggests that these three areas plus other areas are part of a putative frontal network for something like programs or symbolic operations. Maybe consistent idea, maybe loosely, these three areas also possibly parts of the so-called multiple demand network, a set of areas, especially studying the human brain, that are highly active during structured problem solving or abstract reasoning and problem solving in humans. And so there are also direct and indirect inputs from other areas. Here I'm highlighting temporal lobe and parietal lobe areas, which are likely critical in conveying how you process visual information amongst other kinds of information. So I think my goal is to really, I don't think I've solved the problem at all. I think it's just sort of identifying substrates that lead to future studies of how all these areas work together in this drawing task. And we're also performing neural network modeling. And this one possibility, and this is just a sketch, is that we can think of maybe programs as reflecting interpretable algorithms in neural networks with different modules implementing different kinds of procedures, and encoding different kinds of symbolic variables. Here I'm schematizing that for the potential for loop program that's implementing like a repeat. The monkey just understands, draw this item a great number of times. So we're starting to explore this possibility in our modeling and in the neural data. And so with that, I'd like to thank people critical to this project, especially, as I said, Vinrik and Dan and Kadar, and also Xiaojing and Josh and various funding sources. And yeah, thanks a lot for your time and attention. Yeah, that's it. Sorry for going over a little bit if I did.
Well, first, let me just say, I don't want, if anybody needs to leave. I'm sure there's questions for you, Lucas, as well. So you don't leave yet, please.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to stay as long as you want. Yeah.
I had a question. I was very interested in, when you have if you go back a slide where you have the program, I forget what the language, you have the purple things there, which I guess are the elements of the program, and the green things are the primitives, or I don't know exactly what words you're using for that. But one thing that we're interested in a lot in is how, future actions are causing changes in the current one. And you have this nice situation where you've kind of broken it down into something you consider a symbol, like really a standalone item. And so I'm curious whether or not you see either neural or behavioral evidence of things like co-articulation and or strategies and how that pattern of programs is executed that's affected by what's coming or what has just happened.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think there are a few different kind of deeper points here. I think the point of co-articulation and other kinds of sequential effects, we definitely see that. And we probably see it more than, I'd say, traditional motor tasks, just because it's so unconstrained. So in some sense, I've kind of just, like it's posed, I think, it's posed a slight difficulty in analysis. And so I've mostly in my analyses tried to control for those factors in the sequencing task based on, let's say, only analyzing let's say activity for a given stroke that's preceded by strokes in the same location and followed by strokes in the same location. So in some sense, I've treated that more as like a nuisance variable as opposed to an interesting thing that's indicative of planning or the kinds of higher order structure. But that's something I'm really interested in looking into. And I think if you have any ideas on how to address that, it's been a bit tricky, as I said, because of just like how unconstrained the behavior's been.
Well, one thing that I don't know, surprised me, but it's kind of in how you baked in the analysis too. So I'm not sure, and I haven't seen many videos of how the monkey does it, but you would expect that the order by which certain strokes are done are affected by what other strokes need to be done. So even when each stroke is identical, you might expect those kind of order effects. And I'm just curious whether or not you see where if you see those, and if you've analyzed, the neural, where in the system those might arise.
Yeah. So I think that's the basis of the the neural analyses related to the second part on the grammatical rules, where we do see quite strong encoding of the sequential context. So, for instance, a pre-SMA, you can tell if it's a first stroke, second stroke, and you can see even within a particular repeat. Essentially, what looks like is the monkey. What looks like is the activity is counting down. So if the monkey has to do repeat, let's say 4 circles and 2 lines, there's a particular subspace in population space that is responsible for encoding stuff about circles, and then it starts with 4, 3, 2, 1 as the monkey's drawing, and it ends at a consistent state across trials. So if it's 3 circles, it'll start earlier and then count down to the same state. And then once the monkey moves to lines, it goes to different subspace, and then it starts counting down lines. That is partly evidence the monkey has a plan already. It might not really be an explicit plan in the sense of, I'm going to do, but there's some signal in the brain of, okay, I have a sense of I'm going to have to do 4 circles or 3 circles. So there are all sorts of interesting signals there in pre-SMA, especially in pre-SMA, some in PMD, some in PFC related to like boundaries of different kinds of substructures, like of repeating A's, the first A versus last A, and so on. So that's really been the focus of what I've been trying to do recently, and the content of the second preprint I mentioned is looking at that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah.
Really cool.
That's really cool. I have 2 questions. If we have, one of them is just low level about the slide you have from like continuously changing from one symbol to the other, and we're looking at the PCA essentially for PMD. There I saw that, like, if you look at just the 2 extreme cases, like if you allow me to loosely use the term like fixed point, you're not directly going into those choices. Rather, you had like movement along a separate dimension and then coming back to those. I was wondering if you that was you have some intuitions why that initial separation exists and then they actually
I don't know why, but that is a consistent thing we see. And yeah, I don't have a good explanation, but that is what we see. Like there's kind of an axis
related to the urgency signal, because like Polish and other have some sort of a decision making under some urgency. Is there any urgency in the task for the monkey to draw, or else the trial would be lost, or not at all?
Well, the monkey probably has an internal sense of urgency, but there's effectively no time limit.
But it's also going on the opposite direction of the average of those fixed points. So it's going on the opposite direction and converging back to those fixed points. So that's interesting.
But could you explain sort of the how urgency relate to that signal?
So yeah, initially in those like urgency studies, at least, you have one specific dimension in that flow field that is coding for urgency, and then another one, usually orthogonal to that kind of encodes the decision. So the use case of that urgency is that sometimes you just need to commit to either of the decisions, regardless of how much ready you are. So that's why but that urgency can pushes you towards one of the decisions, even if you're not 100% sure yet. Yeah, something like that.
Interesting. I mean, one thing I'll note is that for the images and the morphed images, the images in intermediate, like the ambiguous images, that dynamic is much slower. So you couldn't tell from that state space plot, but it happens very quickly within a couple 100 milliseconds. Image turns on and that whole thing happens. But for the ambiguous images, it takes close to a second. So it kind of like gradually kind of does this. So I don't know. Maybe that means something to you in terms of what you're thinking, but
definitely that kind of like fixed point has also been shown in sort of the coherency task, that you have to really accumulate evidence for your decision. It's not not clear, and then that's a good initial idea, like looking at the difference in the individual trials to figure out what might be causing that different direction. Yeah, and then going back to my more general question is that, I'm really also interested in this abstract symbol representation. Just looking at the paper, my conclusion at the end was that maybe what we see here is not the pure 100% abstract symbol representation. And it's funny that you use the term motor abstraction. So it seems like this activity that we see in PMB is kind of like a abstraction of the motoric component of the task, specifically location and action. And then that's why probably we wouldn't be able to see like the same activity if we have like an orientation change, for instance. Do you agree with that kind of conclusion that probably what we see here is a motor abstraction, but not pure symbol abstraction at the end? And probably we need to look further and maybe not even in the monkey brain.
Yeah, I agree with that. I would say it's symbol in the sense of, some sort of discrete unit or discrete concept, like a forehand in tennis, right? You can't really dissociate that from the actual movement required. Like it's fundamentally tied to the movement involved in making that action. But yet it's still an abstraction in that it's a concept that we have if you're a tennis player, right? That has all these invariances and categorical properties. So that to me, that's the level that I mean. I think you're right. Potentially using the word symbol kind of like elicits, I mean, is asking for a bit of controversy, but I think the point I'm trying to make is that it's this discrete unit, this sort of motor concept that the monkeys can flexibly reuse. And it might be related to, in some sense, mechanistically related to the general idea of symbols. When we talk about, you use symbols in math to do mental computations or to reason logically or to plan the discrete future scenarios. There seems to be an underlying common element to all these different ideas is that there's these discrete units that have certain abstract properties. And those abstract properties can be quite abstract when it comes to human concepts, right? But the fundamental basis is still like this discrete unit that's recombined. So that's kind of the argument I'm making, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think for me, the abstract with like capital A would be something like having a kanji. It doesn't matter if it's upside down or tilted or you're writing that with either vector. It should be represented in all of these cases. But we do agree on the motor abstraction, where like probably you need a symbol to have a similar enough shape, but not necessarily a different location. And that level of abstraction is also, of course, important. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I agree with your assessment. Yeah, that makes sense.
I have a question. Thanks for the talk, by the way. So I have a question on like kind of postural effects. Like, let's say the monkey learned a stroke to draw it from left to right, and then you inhibit that posture somehow. Like it can't draw left to right, it can only draw right to left. Will that have the same activity in, let's say, PMB, where it's trying to go from left to right, or will it switch?
To be clear, you mean left to right in terms of the sequence, or left to right in terms of like draw a stroke like this versus like this?
Yeah, like drawing a stroke left to right or right.
It's essentially, it's very hard to get them to change the direction. That really is like a hardwired thing. So I don't have, I have not tried extensively, but there's no obvious way right now to get the monkey to switch between different directions. Even if you alter their posture, I think they would just not do it, as opposed to actually change the direction, which is distinct from the grammatical rule stuff. They very flexibly learn the different rules. So I think, but that aside, I think conceptually, I think it's an important question, because if we're writing the letter A right this way versus this other way, sometimes is that the same concept? And yeah, I actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that for PMD. Yeah.
Hi, Lucas. I have a quick question. Maybe not so quick, but I was wondering, you were talking a little bit about the interactions between Prisma and the PMV. And I was wondering, what do you think will happen if you disconnect these connections between these areas? How would that affect the performance in your tests?
Yeah, that's a very good question. That'll be an amazing experiment to do. I don't have a very clear hypothesis about what would happen, apart from I would predict that they'd be messed up. And in ideal, yeah.
Just an idea. We know that if you stimulate this pathway in patients, they start to have stuttering-like behaviors. So, so either like their speech is blocked or they start to repeat the same kind of syllable.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
yeah, that would also be interesting to see what will happen with neuroplasticity.
That's super interesting. I mean, first of all, I mean, off the top of your head, do you know what those references are? I'd love to look to that.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Okay, I'll love to see that. Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's there's a lot of classical work in pre-SMA in monkeys too, messing up sequencing, like work by Hikosaka and Tanji. So I think it's consistent with the idea that pre-SMAs evolve internally generated sequences. Yeah, I would know. I would love to do that kind of experiment. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Very question. So you mentioned about how the symbolic program is like repeat circles so many times and then repeat lines. Do you think if you had two sets of stimuli with the same number of circles and lines, but then one where the circles are all clumped together, the lines are all clumped together in different sections of the screen, and then the other one where they're mixed, then they would follow the same symbolic program that they've learned?
Yeah, so you're basically saying, are they learning a location, like a location association with what to do? Like you train them. So the way I trained is loosely like that. Like the training actually happens in a restricted part of the screen. And then in the generalization tests, I use the entire screen. But it's not as extreme as your suggestion, right? So there's still some overlap in the locations. But I think yeah.
No, so what I mean is if they're learning, for example, let's say they learn to do all the circles first and all the lines later, but then you give them a situation with the same number of circles and same number of lines, like 4 circles and 2 lines, but now they're right next, so it's inefficient to go from circle to the third circle without doing the line because it's in the way.
Yeah.
So now they always know to do circles first, and then all the lines next, but then now you switch it up and give them in a way where it'd be inefficient to do that. Do you think they would still follow?
Yeah. So say they already do that, so they will skip the line. So if they know that I'm repeating circles and lines, if the circles are separated by line, they will skip that line and go do the circles, as opposed to doing kind of the local or efficient thing, right? So they already do, I think, what you're suggesting. Yeah.
One more question.
Yep.
One more question, Lucas, if you have time. Sorry about that.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can stay. That's how we're going.
Thank you so much for the talk. Very interesting work.
Thank
My
you.
question is about the primitive encoding in like different areas that you show. For example, PMV was very invariant to the location. And just one point about what Meredith said, I think some people would call those motor synergies, maybe like motor synergies of the primitives of the movements, and then there are like motor things that being encoded in PMV. But my question is about whether, like how, so when you showed that they are not encoded like that in PMD, for example, or other areas, like for example, would you find some dimensions, some 2 PCs that would be invariant to location, and how much of the lower encoding score would mean that these primitives are not like for example, let me say, if you, for example, correlate the activity pattern associated with one of those primitives in location A with the activity pattern associated with the same primitive in location B, would that correlation be higher than the same correlation with other primitives? So what I mean is that, is there the same sort of primitive encoding in other areas like PMD, but also diluted with other factors that specific area cares about? For example, PMD cares about location, whatever. PMV doesn't care about location or whatever, those kind of things.
Yeah.
Thanks.
That's a good question. So it's because all the results I showed you were population, right? So I could have been drowning out. So it's very rare for me to see that in PMD. Like, so I found a few neurons that do look quite invariant, like, maybe comparable to neuron showed in PMV. But it is actually very rare. And even if you do like target dimensional reduction, finding a linear projection that maximally encode shape, but minimally encode location, it's still a very weak signal. So it's still quite dramatically different from PMV. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it's very, very weak. Yeah.
Thanks. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you,
much,
guys.
Lucas.
Thank you. Thank
See
you.
you pretty soon. Bye. Take care.
Bye.
You got the good
See you.
work.
Thanks. Thanks, guys. Bye.